The year is 2013. The scariest video game of all time is Slender. The online horror community is dominated by creepy canine faces and photo-negative mice. And after months of staying up late on school nights, scrolling through this stuff on my iPod Touch, I write and publish my very first creepypasta. Entitled Taxette, after the hated god of violent death. It features a homicide detective investigating a murder at a hunting lodge in the Pacific Northwest. As our protagonist scours the room, he notices that the taxidermy deer head mounted over the fireplace seems endowed with, hyper-realistic human eyes. Hijinks ensue. Looking back on it now, it's terrible. It's not good. It's embarrassing. I was like 14 or 15 when I wrote it, thinking it was going to be my magnum opus, my big explosion on the horror scene. This would be the piece legends are built upon. I'd become the next Stephen King before I even got my learner's permit. But while I look back on that story and cringe at the poor wording, awkward dialogue, and dubious mythology, there's one thing that manages to stick with me. That goddamn deer head. I wrote the story after an experience working as a counselor at a summer camp, where the nature center was surveyed by a mounted deer head on the wall. Let me tell you, that thing unnerved me, especially in my off hours where I had plenty of time to sit alone and think about all the other counselors spreading rumors about me being a special needs kid. Where I had plenty of time to sit alone and let my mind wander, and it very often wandered to that deer head. What if it turns its neck? What if I noticed its eyes have moved? Was it always staring at that one spot? And thus, Taxette was born. Of all things in nature to frighten or unsettle you, deer seem like kind of a strange choice. And yet there seems to be an unusually large amount of deer-centric horror imagery floating around, especially in internet meme format. At the time I wrote Taxette, I had no idea why the deer head bothered me so much. But in recent years I got to thinking, what merits these seemingly innocent and docile creatures their seemingly unearned reputation as harbingers of the creeps? Let's find out. Since the beginning of time, deer have captivated our imaginations and run wild with them. One of the earliest examples of a deer portrayed as something more than just an animal can be found in the cave of the Trois Frères in southern France. The piece, nicknamed the Sorcerer by the anthropologist who discovered and transposed it, depicts a charismatic entity incorporating elements from several animals, a human included, but most striking of all is its distinctly deer-like antlers. Its unique design stands out from much of the cave's artwork, one of which shows a bear getting so royally fucked by spears that it's literally vomiting blood, and another which is just a penis. I like to think these two images alone perfectly sum up the human condition. It's been theorized that the sorcerer represents an ancient deity from prehistoric religions, and if such is the case, it could be one of the oldest known depictions of a deity in human history. But a more widely known deer-headed figure would emerge thousands of years later, around 400 BC. The horned god, commonly associated with neo-paganism, can be traced back to the Celtic deity Cernunnos, the lord of wild things. He is depicted as both benevolent and mysterious, surrounded by a menagerie of different animals. Modern interpretations connect him with the unspoiled beauty of nature, sexuality, and masculinity, which makes sense considering the portrayals of Cernunnos that show him well endowed with a very large set of antlers. Such connections are not just restricted to paganism. From Greece and Rome to India, deer, especially stags, have commonly been associated with the wilderness, virility, and vitality. It's yet another instance of different cultures from different parts of the world, drawing very similar meanings from very similar sources. To me at least, there's no other megafauna that physically captures the essence of the forest more than the white-tailed deer, the species I'm most familiar with. With their spindly legs, camouflage coats, and branching antlers, these animals seem to not just live in the woods, they are the woods. The way they skirt along the tree line and melt into the undergrowth, they almost seem like wandering spirits who know more than they're letting on. Not to mention those abyssal black eyes that see everything and no, don't fall into that! Of course, this is all a product of personal interpretation, but I can imagine others reaching similar conclusions, especially those ancient peoples. It's human nature to ascribe greater meanings to things and spin fanciful identities for them. So with all that said, how does it relate back to their unlikely rebranding as emissaries of horror? I think it can be summed up in one word.
Corruption.
There are a lot of creatures in the forest that are scary, but there's a difference with these more conventionally frightening animals. We know to fear them, and they're quite good at making that fact known. But something happens when deer are presented in such a manner. There's this understanding that something's not right. The impression that something else has moved in and possessed the space in these animals' hearts and minds, that they've become corrupted. This shouldn't be right. We know what deer are supposed to be. The contrast between their unassuming air and this unnatural disposition is unsettling. It's wrong. And when the deer are wrong, we know by extension something's wrong with the woods too. What could be happening out there that's caused the deer to go bad? What entities or forces beyond our comprehension are brewing that's making the deer act in this manner? I don't know. And frankly, I don't want to know. And that's the hidden horror of deer. When they go bad, that means there are worse problems afoot. But if we're looking for some perspectives more grounded in reality, consider this 4chan repost. I was hunting with my grandfather for my 19th birthday about a year ago, and we both watched a deer slam its head into a rock until its antlers and skull were shattered. Once its brains were everywhere, it tried to lick them up and looked like it couldn't even use its jaw or tongue right. So it just stood upright like a fucking human and just walked into the river and died. We left immediately and my granddad was fucking terrified. I haven't been near the woods since, and he moved to Florida with my grandmother for safety reasons. Even if this didn't really happen, 4chan, this just strikes a creepier chord than if it were something like a wolf or a mountain lion. This is, in my opinion, due to the deer's status as a prey animal. These aren't animals we normally consider as aggressive or dangerous. Compared to their predators, they're not even that smart, which in turn makes them even more unsettling and unpredictable. And it's not like deer are incapable of harm. With their hooves and antlers and muscularity, they can definitely cause some damage if motivated. But there's something more to when an animal like a deer decides it wants to hurt you. With a predator, they are literally armed to the teeth with ways to kill you, and kill you fast. With non-predators, however, it's not so straightforward. Armed with only their comparably limited and imprecise endowments, they'll do whatever it takes to not feel threatened anymore. They will puncture and pummel and pulverize until it finally crosses their simple minds that the threat has been neutralized. With some herbivores, their sheer size would make your death quick, but under the cloven step of a deer, your death would be ugly, agonizing, and protracted. God forbid if that deer staring at you from across the undergrowth decided to go on the offensive. But would it? A similar concept was explored in Jen D. Tartakovsky's Primal, where despite its many prehistoric horrors, fans unanimously agree the most terrifying creature is the infected sauropod from the episode Plague of Madness. The episode went to great lengths to portray the sauropods as naturally peaceful and benign, which made the victim's subsequent transformation all the more jarring. This isn't an apex predator. This is a gentle giant that's completely lost its mind and wishes only to spread plague and destruction wherever it goes. Relating back to Anand's hunting trip, a likely explanation for this story, again assuming it really happened, might lie in chronic wasting disease, aptly known otherwise as the zombie deer disease. In short, it is a prion-induced degenerative brain disease that radically affects the deer's behavior and coordination, which might have resulted in a self-destructive act like this. While aggression towards humans, or the urge to spread infection, something more akin to rabies, isn't in chronic wasting disease's playbook. Recent studies show that discarded CWD prions are capable of binding to plants and infecting any herbivore unfortunate enough to consume them. A real-world example of something in the woods making the deer go mad. And as for the transmissibility of chronic wasting disease prions to humans, the verdict remains unknown. In another recent example, deer, elk specifically, are featured in Stephen Graham Jones's novel, The Only Good Indians. In that book, a vengeful deer-headed spirit stalks 4 Blackfoot men who recklessly massacred an entire herd of elk in their youth, a mother and calf among them. It's a walking metaphor for a brutal crime against nature, and nature spitting something back out to slaughter in turn. Again, the creepiness factor is up to 11 with the characterization of a deer-headed human entity. The incongruity of a prey animal, its image usurped and flipped into something more predatory, just adds an extra dimension of obscenity. And as long as we're talking about deer-headed entities, we cannot ignore the most prevalent monster in popular culture, the Wendigo, which, as we know, is a flesh-eating beast from the woods, the personification of evil, often depicted as a hulking hairy demon with a heavily antlered head, right? Wrong! Turns out few, if any, indigenous tribes portray the Wendigo as anything remotely bestial at all. To them, a Wendigo was at one point an ordinary human, overcome with a mortal sin such as greed and gluttony, descending to greater and greater extremes until they physically turn into a reflection of what they've become. Gaunt skin pulled tight over famished bones, with a heart of ice. Wendigos were at one point cautionary tales about what happens when a person lets sin literally overtake them. But then, Europeans happened. In 1910, English author Algernon Blackwood brought the Wendigo to Western audiences with his novella entitled The Wendigo. The creature is portrayed as the call of the wild personified that lures men into the forest to run deliriously until their feet catch fire and their essence is absorbed. Not exactly the stark allegory for greed and disregard for fellow man concocted by the Native Americans. Reading the novella with its outdated attitudes and language, it's hard to look past the irony of Native Americans relating the Wendigo to European colonizers, indiscriminately tearing through their lands, while that very same legend was interpreted by those Europeans as a simple beast from the woods. Regardless, the Wendigo's rebranding as a carnivorous, inhuman monster took hold in Western media, and while some regardless have gone to depict humans turning to cannibalism and transforming into the beast, the detachment of the humanity from its original source still stands. Which means that, yes, amid all the portrayals of a Wendigo in popular culture, the most accurate to this day remains Disney's The Lone Ranger. And sure enough, one of the Western Wendigo's most prevalent depictions is that of a deer. For those early artists with their traditional Christian-centric upbringings, it most likely goes back to paganism, with strange new lands surrounded by dark forests and heathen beliefs. It only makes sense to consciously or subconsciously transfer the heretical imagery they were familiar with onto unfamiliar accounts of vicious, flesh-eating monsters in the woods. And again, harkening back to imagery of the forest and the greater themes of nature out of balance already associated with the Wendigo, the deer just seemed to fit. The next time you're out in the woods, perhaps at too late an hour, and you catch one of these animals giving you that paralyzing stare, try not to look too deeply. You might see something you regret. Hey there! If you made it to the end, thanks for watching. This is a video I've been wanting to make for a while now, and I hope you all enjoyed it. I'd like to thank all the artists whose works I used throughout the video. I tried crediting everyone appropriately. If I missed something, if I did something wrong, or if you want me to plug you further, let me know in the comments. I will fix it. I want to give my special thanks to @Zumazaki, who provided the artwork for the deer smashing its head in scenes. You can follow him on Twitter here. He's open for commissions. He's done great work for me in the past, so check him out and hit him up if you want some great art. And now for some shameless plugs. I am once again asking for... Sorry. I have a novel out. It's called Hell's Gulf, for those of you who like their horror with a side of surreal comedy and seawater. Check it out in the description below.